very good morning to everybody who's joined us, and thank you very much for attending our webinar on the dairy industry and the dairy packaging trends. Today's webinar we're going to target to finish it up within an hour. And on behalf of SAPIN, I thank everyone for attending. I'd like to introduce our co-host, Mukesh Jaiswal, who is from Aranca, and they have been partners with us in researching this webinar. So, Mukesh, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Saurabh. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today. Let me just give a quick introduction about myself. So I am Mukesh Jaiswal. I work with this organization called as Aranca. Aranca is a global research and advisory firm based out of India. So we have a established history of more than 15 years within the global research and consulting space. And we have a very deep presence and extensive experience of working with GCC clients as well. We basically we offer solutions across the enterprise. We have the business research wing, which is basically for the sales and marketing and strategic functions of the enterprise. Then we have the procurement research team. We have the investment research and valuation research team, and we also have the IP research team that helps with intellectual properties. So that's the broad range of services that we have to offer. And I think for more information, please feel free to obviously browse through our website or contact our local sales office that we have in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you. So I'd like to start off with a quick corporate overview of SAPIN, so we can put out there who we are and what our ideology is going into this webinar. So SAPIN basically stands for Saudi Arabian Packaging Industry. We're a 45-year-old company headquartered in Dammam in Saudi Arabia, but we also have presence in the UAE. We serve clients across the MENA region, and we're driven by our vision that is to enhance our customers' brands through world-class packaging in the MENA region. Our mission is to support our customers' growth through quality packaging solutions delivered on time and in full. Key segments that SAPIN serves is the food industry, the consumer hygiene industry, and the industrial industry. So these are broadly the three main categories that we produce, mainly metal and plastic packaging for. So getting into the webinar and the subject for today, to begin with, the goal of today's webinar is to be able to sit down with the different players of the dairy industry and to discuss where we think the industry may be headed. Of course, we are no subject matter experts in the dairy industry. However, since we are driven by innovation and we are looking at developing sustainable packaging, we do believe that perhaps some of our insights may be interesting to share with you all. And it is always exciting to share insights back and forth. Today, we'll be sharing some of our insights from the packaging industry and talking a little bit about where we think packaging itself may be heading. And finally, I'd like Mukesh to tell you a little bit of how this webinar has been built and what our research methodology has been. Mukesh.
Thank you, Saurabh. So I think talking about the research methodology, this whole webinar has been designed based on desk research sources. We've basically relied on very authentic sources like the OECD, FAO, Euromonitor, and also a lot of these industry experts that we have out there. A bit of validation from there and as well. Now, some of the numbers that we have in the webinar may be directional in nature. We've obviously not done it the scientific way, but it's just the intention here is to be able to tell a certain story and a certain trend that we believe is actually making a lot of impact in this particular market.
Great. So with that, I think we will officially kick off the webinar, and the first part will be presented by Mukesh, which is a summary of the dairy trends in the GCC. The second half of the presentation is going to be on packaging and how that's going to evolve in our opinion, and then very briefly on how SAPIN or Aranca can support brand owners in their journey forward. So with that, we will start our first section with Mukesh.
All right. There is some echo, I guess. Can you hear me fine? Yeah, so the first section that we have within this presentation is essentially on the GCC dairy snapshot and trends. And within this section, if you go to the next slide, what we are basically going to cover is couple of things. One, the GCC dairy growth areas. What is the outlook for GCC dairy industry in 2021 and beyond. And also we are going to touch base upon the impact that the COVID-19 outbreak has had on the GCC's dairy industry, and what are the emerging trends out of that we can learn lessons from going ahead. Yeah, so the first section here, the first slide that we have on the screen is a bit heavy in terms of a lot of numbers over there. But the intention here is to be able to, explain the current penetration levels of dairy consumption. Okay, so what we are essentially talking about is per capita consumption of several dairy products within the GCC region, as compared to some of the international benchmarks that we have over there. The first category that you see on the extreme left is the biggest category that you have, which is liquid dairy, that accounts for almost 75% of the total dairy consumption in the GCC region. What liquid dairy really consists of is anything other than the cheese, whole milk powder, and buttermilk powder and skim milk powder that you have out there, which means I am basically talking about milk, yogurt, cream, laban, labne, ice cream. All those categories that we have over there is basically a part of the liquid dairy category. Now, very interesting to see, but not very surprising to see that in the case of liquid dairy, in terms of per capita consumption, GCC is at the bottom, at the lowest consumption as compared to the global markets that we have over there. Now, very easy to explain this, because we all understand the kind of extreme weather conditions that GCC has, which is not very conducive for indigenous production of fresh milk and fresh milk based products over there in a very, very large scale and quantity. That is the reason, I think, why a kind of GCC stands very, very low in that mix in terms of per capita consumption for liquid dairy. So the question obviously here is, what is the growth outlook look like? I mean, does it mean there are a lot of these food security initiatives that the respective governments in the region are taking? Does this mean we are in for very, very rapid, fast rate of growth for the liquid dairy category? And to answer that, I think I will take references from the recent actions that we have taken, that we have seen some of the local governments have been taking in this particular space. Particularly UAE is actually leading the food security initiative. It has recently formed a food security council that is only going to focus on the initiatives and the actions that are needed to kind of be able to make UAE very, very secure about their food sources. And as we know, UAE is a country whose self-sufficiency rate for food is about 10%. So more than 90% of what UAE consumes is actually imported. And similarly, when you look at Saudi Arabia market, almost 28-29% is something that is produced locally, but still more than 70% of what is consumed is actually remains imported. So which means food security initiatives that the government is actually taking is going to be at the center of how much growth will categories like liquid dairy be able to extract going forward. We've seen Oman as well taking a lot of keen interest. Oman government recently formed this company called as Mazoon Dairy, in 2019, if I'm not wrong, and they are targeting to be able to produce about 200 million liters of milk by 2026. So that's the level of scale that they are really planning to achieve, for the local market. Similarly, Qatar, we saw, back in 2017, they imported about thousands of, cows from different parts of the world, and today one of their major dairy companies, Baladna, is producing more than 50% of the domestic consumption requirement. So essentially, the liquid dairy category, I mean, just to come back to what is the growth outlook that we're talking about? We're essentially talking about it being able to sustain, to grow at a steady, stable rate going forward, because of it's obviously going to be a slow and gradual progress towards being able to very, very secure about the food sources in the region, because there are obviously challenges about the weather and several other factors that affect these industries. So that's where we expect the liquid dairy segment to really focus on. And then if you look at the right side of the slide, you have some of the other dairy industry categories. We have cheese, we have whole milk powder, butter, and skim milk powder displayed over there. Now what really stands out here, as you can see, is GCC is at the top in terms of whole milk powder consumption. And obviously this is not surprising, right? I mean, because it has to do again with the same logic of how indigenous how much indigenous production is happening in that particular region. You have regions like North America, Asia, Europe at the bottom of the table over there, because they are the producers of their own dairy and dairy products, and obviously therefore the consumption for milk powder is on the lower side. Instead, consumers in those markets have plenty of options to kind of choose from when it comes to dairy liquids instead of dairy solids. So that's what really drives the high consumption of milk powder in GCC. Now the last three categories that you have is cheese, butter, and skim milk powder. You see that GCC obviously is much better placed against other countries in the versus the liquid dairy market there, which means that yes, there is also going to be a lot of growth that we can expect to see in some of these categories. And with that, if we go to the next slide, where we have the projections from OECD FAO for again the same set of product categories, and you will see that the market is actually expected to grow at about under 2%. But the categories that we just talked about, cheese, butter, and skim milk powder, are expected to actually grow at about 1 to 2 percentage points more than the market average. Anywhere between 2.5 to 3.5%. And this category, these categories that we're talking about is essentially going to be driven by a few innovations that are happening. Saurabh, if you can go to the next slide. Uh, so basically the factor that is driving growth in some of these processed dairy market products is basically the innovations that we are seeing in the market by the brand owners that we have here today in this forum. We are seeing that cheese is being positioned as a healthy product. We are seeing that there are product launches in the form of vitamin enriched, low fat, sugar free products. There is a lot of emphasis on health in the marketing and in the messaging of the products that are being launched. There is fermented dairy products. There are innovations that we are seeing in yogurt varieties as well. There is flavored yogurt, there is fruit yogurt, there is low fat yogurt, and all of these is actually driving huge customer interest, and it's really attracting the young population within the GCC sector. The other thing that is actually also pushing growth is innovation on the convenience side. Given the rising given the busy lifestyles of the GCC population, we are seeing that women are obviously getting into the workforce in the Saudi Arabian market, which means there's very little time to kind of be able to cook food and get those things organized at home. So what it means is that there is a huge growth potential that we are seeing from a convenience perspective, and brand owners are obviously again trying to come up with very very interesting sort of packaging in the form of on the go packaging, convenient packaging options. So all in all, there are these two reasons why the processed dairy market is expected to really outperform in the next few years. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, the second subsection that I want to cover today is essentially the most interesting piece, given the context of coronavirus today. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the coronavirus outbreak from two perspectives. We basically try to analyze this market from the impact from a direct impact perspective versus an indirect impact perspective. And if you go deeper into the direct impacts, essentially we're talking about four important trends that we saw emerging, as soon as the COVID-19 outbreak kicked in, and there were a lot of these strict, restrictions that were in place on business, on movements, and those kind of stuff. The first thing that we have here is essentially the lockdowns. There were a lot of uncertainty at the start of the COVID-19 outbreak restrictions. And because of which, there was huge panic buying, stockpiling that we saw, because consumers weren't really sure as to what's going to happen next. So it obviously caused huge panic buying and huge stockpiling. That is one major trend that we have seen in this market in the early months of COVID-19 restrictions. Secondly, we saw that the consumption at home increased at a very rapid rate. I mean, and most of that happened obviously during the lockdown period. What this means is obviously that this is coming at the cost of out of home consumption. I mean, the food service channel, really went under the bus. Very little demand that they saw, that segment declined very rapidly, but at the same time a bit of offsetting did happen because of increased at home consumption by consumers. The third thing that we kind of came across is obviously again sudden spike in demand for long life dairy products. Now the reason why this happened is obviously because people weren't very people weren't okay with going out, or maybe going to the grocery stores to fill their groceries too often, amidst the coronavirus scare. They just wanted to be at home, even if even if it meant that they want to order from the online portals. They wanted to still restrict, and they increase their basket size so that they can order more in one. Therefore, they don't have to really come in contact with people outside their private bio bubble that they had created, and which is what has really driven the growth for long life dairy, because that because these products like the UHT milk and all can last for more than 6 months. So therefore preventing them from going out again and again. The last thing that we again saw is again very interesting to see that there was huge interest that we saw in milk and yogurt categories, and more so because these are categories which are perceived to be offering better immunity and much more health friendly. So those are the things that again were at the top of the minds of the consumer, and because of which milk and yogurt kind of saw the maximum increase in growth. Now what we also did is we tried to analyze the direct impacts from a quantitative perspective, and we looked at the listed few listed companies that we have in the dairy industry within the region. We looked at Almarai, Sadafco, Nadek, and we tried to look at the two immediate quarters following the March 2020 when coronavirus was at its peak. And what we really saw is, as you can see, some of the categories that we have over there have shown more than 20% rise in the volumes and value of sales that it generated. And which are these categories? We are talking about categories like long life dairy. We are talking about categories like the processed dairy products like cheese, butter, and cream. So these are categories that actually saw the massive increase in terms of demand and sales, across different organizations. On the other hand, you have fresh dairy, which is something that kind of remained the same. It obviously wasn't impacted negatively, but it was obviously growing at a steady, stable rate of about 1% in the first quarter following March 2020, and then obviously it started to show a bit more increase in terms of demand as consumers became more and more comfortable with the coronavirus situation, and there was much more clarity as to how the situation is going to evolve. So all in all, if you look at this slide, it obviously gives you a sense that COVID may have been bad for many industries, but particularly for the GCC dairy industry, COVID seems to have had a rather positive impact, especially in the direct sense that we're talking about here. Now, if we move to the next slide quickly, yep. So I think indirect impact, we are talking about segments like immune boosting foods. We saw a huge spike again for immune boosting foods. A lot of customer interest, that was generated because of coronavirus. The potential emergence of dairy alternatives is something that I want to touch upon. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is the change that we are seeing in the sales channel. The adoption or late emergence of e-commerce, finally for the GCC region. Now, if we take a quick, deeper look at immune boosting foods part here, essentially we're talking about two important elements. One is the probiotics segment, which saw huge, massive rise in 2020. And why I'm calling it massive rise is because if I go by, the International Probiotics Association, it says that in 2019, before coronavirus was a big factor, they had not expected this market to grow at all. I mean, it was expected to be almost as flat as it could be. It was expected to be very lackluster in terms of demand growth, but obviously nobody factored in coronavirus at that point. And as soon as corona virus kind of triggered in, we saw huge interest coming in from customers for products that give them better immunity and are good for their health and organic in nature. So those are the reasons why today, as we sit, we are expecting this market to be growing by more than 8%, and therefore the way it's kind of worded is that it's actually massive rise for probiotics, because it was expected to not grow or witness a very very flat type of a growth, and today we are talking about more than 8% growth in 2020 alone. So that's the kind of impact that it has had. The second part here is about how we saw innovative product introductions in the market. I'll take a reference of India here. In India, Amul, the leading dairy company in India, came up with this interesting flavor milk of turmeric milk originally, and then after that it followed up with ginger milk and tulsi milk, and most of these categories obviously attracted huge customer interest, because in the context of corona, obviously these product launches did very very well. On the other hand, from a GCC context perspective, if you look at the kind of products that we saw occupying a lot more retail shelf than ever, most of these products were basically being marketed as vitamin C and vitamin D enriched. We also saw Nada's milk that is enriched with vitamin D having a higher shelf space over there. We also saw the retail shelves being populated with a lot of juices that were based on vitamin C and vitamin D during the peak of coronavirus. So those are the two things I think that we were able to pick that really had a very very huge impact from an immune boosting segment perspective. Now, if you look at the next subsection that we have, is essentially on the plant-based dairy piece. Now, plant-based dairy, again, another very very interesting segment that is booming across the globe. Market is expected to grow at about 9-10% in 2020 vis-a-vis 2019. This is an estimate by Cargill, one of the largest food manufacturers from the US. About 9 to 10% is the growth that they are expecting for this particular market. And why the growth is so high is because that the kind of channel mix that they have is very different, right? I mean, today most of the plant-based dairy products are routed through the retail channel, vis-a-vis the conventional milk and milk products that are have a good mix of both retail as well as food service channel. And because food service obviously plummeted big time, it impacted the dairy industry a little bit more than the non dairy or plant based dairy industry. So that's the significance of a plant based industry from a coronavirus perspective. Now, if you go a little back in the history and try and understand the evolution of plant based dairy, as we know that it was initially driven by demand from lactose intolerant customers, but as information spread, so started spreading, awareness started spreading about the benefits of it, from an immunity perspective, from a hormones perspective, allergens, and that it helps and protects animal welfare then better than any other option available right now. It kind of started becoming more of a widely adopted product category. And then if you look a little deeper into the kind of products that we are talking about, the sources that we're talking about, soya milk, obviously, as we know, it's obviously the biggest segment out there right now. But amidst the coronavirus, market, what really grew faster is basically the almond milk and the oat milk. Because of, again, perceived benefits that are better in terms of gut health, protein and lipids. I think these are things that really drove higher demand and higher sales for almond milk and oat milk across the globe. And in general, if you look at this vegan milk market from a global perspective, there are a lot of these customer surveys that have recently happened, and different sources have conducted different market surveys, and most of these surveys actually support and suggest that for example, in the US, more than 60% of the respondents had actually tried or purchased or regularly purchased plant-based dairy in 2018. In UK, the percentage was more than 70%. In Asia, almost 50% of the respondents said that they have tried or they are regularly buying plant-based dairy products over there. Now, what this means is that it is obviously going to be a very very big phenomenon. Today, it may not be a very very big concept in the GCC's context. In GCC, it's still a novelty. One of the only brands that we are aware of that is publicly launching the product is Sadafco. Sadafco has obviously launched a soya milk product in the market, but the potential remains very, very high. And why I'm saying the potential is very high, because if you look at some of the international brands that are present in the market, Danone, Arla, Nestle, these are brands that have already started participating in this space in the international markets. They may not have launched this line of product in the GCC region yet, but their global commitment is very, very high, and therefore we believe, sooner than later, maybe about two years down the line, you will see a lot of these plant-based alternatives as well making deeper inroads within the GCC market and occupying a lot of shelf space. Now, if that opportunity is definitely established, what we need to learn about this market is what is it really that is driving growth of alternative milk and milk products versus what it is that is actually deterring the rate of growth that is expected. Now, if you look at this survey, again conducted by one of the agencies that we have over there, uh, you look at some of the benefits that customers already perceive about milk-based alternatives. That they are easily available at grocery stores. They are better than regular milk. They are more environmentally friendlier. They make them very, very good. Feel good about it. They obviously help animal welfare. They are good for health of the consumer. So those are things that they've already kind of suggested very, very strongly. But one thing that they also agree on is that these are products that are a little more expensive than they would like, which means this is one aspect that is actually going to also affect their mass adoption, and it may just keep them in the niche segment. But obviously, as things improve, as volumes increase, as customer interest obviously becomes more mass and more wider, we will also see softening of some of the selling prices and cost of production, and therefore these obviously things will definitely positively affect the growth of this particular space. Now, with that, I think the last section that I want to cover here is the rise in e-commerce channel. Saurabh, if you can go to the next slide. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so I think from an e-commerce perspective, very interesting sales channel, considering the current, significant under-penetration of e-commerce in the GCC market. And why I call it at significantly under-penetrated is because, if you look at Saudi Arabia or if you look at UAE, both these markets are obviously the better markets within the GCC region from an opportunity and volume perspective. But these markets are still, about 3 or 4%, of the total retail purchases happen through the e-commerce channel. Now, why this is considered to be small is because if you look at it in the context of Europe, Europe obviously is a market that is, that is often benchmarked, used as a benchmark for the GCC region. In the European market, you have e-commerce retail penetration as high as 16% for the UK market, for example. And if you go a little bit more on the extreme, you have US that is again around 14-15%. If you compare the 3 or 4% for Saudi and UAE with China, which is a fast emerging market, we're talking about China at around 12-13% in terms of total retail penetration. Now, what is even more interesting to learn about the e-commerce is if you look at the grocery segment within the GCC's e-commerce market, it's just under 1%. The penetration of groceries, the penetration of e-commerce within the grocery purchases that customers do. It's just under 1%. In the Europe, it would be anywhere between 6 to 8%. So that's the level of extremities that I'm talking about, and that's the reason we are calling it a significantly underpenetrated market. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that it is always going to grow like that, and it's always going to remain underpenetrated? The answer is certainly no, because COVID-19 has actually done very, very good for this particular space. Amidst the lockdown, when customers were locked in at their homes, they obviously started using a lot of these food delivery apps. They got habituated to they understood the convenience of using some of these food delivery apps. We saw that there were already a lot of these food delivery apps that were present in the market, but they weren't obviously doing as much volumes, and suddenly they saw a huge spike in demand for delivery, for online purchases and those kind of stuff. We also, as a result, saw that there were a lot of these newer startups that started food local delivery apps as well. And if we go by the estimate by Kearney Research, it says that just in 2020, because of e-commerce, $2 billion plus of additional sales is expected just because of COVID-19 alone. So COVID-19 is actually expected to give a big boost to $2 billion plus of additional sales within the GCC market. So what this means is actually COVID is going to act as the catalyst of change for the e-commerce market, because customers may have not been very fond of using the apps and that they have, or the websites for ordering at home, but now that they have gotten introduced to it, it is going to kind of definitely remain sustain that kind of trend. And we are expecting, if you go by Smithers 2020, we are expecting this market to grow at anywhere over 12%, in the next 5 years within the whole of Middle East. So that's the level of significance the e-commerce channel is going to really have on the dairy industry as well. Now, just to quickly summarize the key takeaways from the first section, what we first looked at is that GCC in a few segments of the dairy industry still remains underpenetrated, which means that most of the new growth is actually expected to come from the processed dairy products. And liquid dairy, on the other hand, will continue to maintain its stable growth momentum, obviously mainly driven by the slow gradual progress on the food security side. Then we looked at COVID-19 from the prism of direct impact versus indirect impact, and all in all, we obviously understood that from a direct impact perspective, COVID obviously has had a positive impact. Looking at the financials of some of the companies that we saw, most of the demand obviously was concentrated around the long life foods and milk and yogurt categories, because of the health and convenience that it kind of brought to the consumers. Then we also looked at quickly into the indirect impacts, where we talked about the growth in immune boosting foods. We looked at the potential emergence of dairy alternatives in the short term, and then we also looked at how solid and strong growth of e-commerce is expected as a sales channel within this region, and also certainly going to hit the GCC's dairy industry as well. Now, with that, I will hand it over to Saurabh, and he'll take you forward with the next section here.
Thank you very much, Mukesh. Just for everyone who has joined us, we will have a question and answer session, towards the end of it. So, we can complete everything within the stipulated time. Now, I'm going to open up a little bit about packaging, and I'd like to share some insights with you on where we think packaging may be evolving, especially in context to the dairy industry. So within this section, we will look at three subsections. One, the first being sustainability. The reason we will look at sustainability is because this has become the biggest buzzword and the biggest consideration for brand owners and consumers alike. And I think the future of packaging will be heavily dependent on how sustainable brands can make their packaging. As Mukesh mentioned, there's a lot of talk about convenience, the rise of millennials, growth in women working in Saudi Arabia, and overall a shift in lifestyle is putting pressure on packaging as well. And finally, the implementation on technology and how technology can be embedded within packaging to create a better brand experience for the customer. So with that, we will first start by looking at what exactly a package is. Most people look at a package as just an item to protect the product that's inside it, or as a tool to differentiate their brand from other brands. But the truth is, packaging is so much more than that. Packaging is a product in itself that helps a product have more convenience. It could be used to generate more engagement. And now, very importantly, packaging can signify a brand's intent to its consumer. Interestingly, in Europe, 40% of consumers are ready to boycott a product if the packaging used is not sustainable or if a product is overpackaged. Now, we don't have that same sort of consumer behavior in the Middle East. However, what is becoming very clear is that the medium of packaging can be a great tool for brands to symbolize what they really stand for. And we will show you a few examples from around the world in how global brands are looking towards that direction. Now, this is a research survey done that has a sample size of 65,000. This examines the top environmental concerns from people across all continents. It's very interesting to see that plastic waste features as one of the top concerns in every continent except Latin America. And the reason is Latin America has huge problems with their river systems and water pollution. So plastic is connected as a concern there as well, but not in the top three. Globally, plastic waste is the second most talked about and concerned item after climate change. And the, the intensity has become pretty real to the point that it's estimated that so much of plastic packaging waste lands up in the oceans that by the year 2050, we would have the same weight of marine fish as we would have of plastic waste in our oceans. And this is something that's really concerning. It doesn't matter whether or not we love the environment, but a world where we have more plastic than fish in the ocean is a scary thing to think about. Now, obviously, we don't want to sit here and say plastic is bad because plastic really isn't bad. We have to look at the topic pragmatically and we have to be fair to what plastic could be. Now, we aren't very big in plastic manufacturing. We are more focused in metal. But even then, I think it's a responsibility of us as a packaging manufacturer to clear some of the misconceptions about plastic so that we all can understand how we can better use this to our benefit. Now, if you look at an ordinary plastic bottle, the truth is, plastics were never engineered with sustainability in mind. Plastics were engineered with keeping costs as effective as possible in mind. Now, on average, less than 15% of plastic packaging gets recycled. And the reason that is the case is because recycling infrastructure is really poor around the world, and containers themselves have not been designed efficiently. For example, a normal water bottle has three types of plastic on it. The body is probably made out of LDPE or PET. The label could be made out of LDPE or PVC, it depends. And the cap is generally made out of HDPE, which is high density polyurethane. So this creates numerous challenges in the recycling process because each plastic element needs to be stripped apart before it can even be recycled. So one has to ask themselves, why is plastics fundamentally so strangely designed? And like I said, the answer is cost effectiveness. Now, the world is waking up to this issue and plastics are getting more efficient. However, we would like to point out that single-use plastics are under tremendous pressure and that should be considered within a brand's packaging strategy because globally, more than 127 countries are looking at banning this to save the ocean. Now, the problem is that the merits of plastic become the demerits of plastic when they land up in a landfill or in an ocean. Plastic elongates shelf life, which means it doesn't degrade easily. It offers a product great protection against the elements, which again means it won't break down easily. It's strong and durable. It won't break down. It's lightweight, so it means it can fly and it's difficult to contain. And of course, plastic gives this to brand owners at costs that are cheaper than any presently available alternate. So the truth is, plastics are not going to go away because they're too feasible. So we will talk a little bit today about how we can improve on the situation and discuss a few alternates to plastics or better substitutes to plastics that may help you in your packaging decision going forward. Um, if we look at the global landscape, 127 countries have decided to reduce or ban single-use plastics, including countries in the GCC. The UAE is in the process of banning single-use plastics. Single-use plastics would have been banned, at least in the Emirate of Dubai, if not for the COVID virus. That being said, once we overcome the situation, I'm sure single-use plastics will come under the scanner again. Kenya has put a ban on all single-use plastics in 2017. Zimbabwe has introduced a ban on polystyrene packaging. The United Kingdom has taxed plastic bags. And China has a plan to ban all non-degradable bags in all cities and towns by 2022. So all in all, plastic is single-use plastic is under tremendous pressure. Global brands as well are looking at improving let's say, the carbon footprint throughout the supply chain. Nestle has committed to invest, little over $2 billion in improving their sustainable packaging. Arla has goals to be carbon net zero by 2050, and Danone has committed to 100% recyclable, reusable, or compostable plastic packaging by 2025. Um, Now, the problem I think we all have to ask ourselves is coming to terms with the fact that the world's population is projected to grow by 1/3 over the next 30 years. And if we don't change how we do things, and if we don't keep sustainability at the core, we are driving ourselves to disaster because we cannot sustain the planet as it stands today. Uh, so now I think it's important for us to touch upon what does this mean for the dairy industry and what we can do to improve our own contribution towards sustainability. I'm going to ask Mukesh to support me a little bit on this because this is an important slide. Fundamentally, what this slide shows you is how much plastic is used within the dairy industry. With the exception of liquid dairy, which is often packed in aseptic cartons, a lot of other dairy is packed in plastic, from margarine to bulk milk powders to cheese. Cheese slices are unfortunately one of the biggest culprits. Um, there's a lot of plastic that is used in dairy. It's estimated that about 44% of all packaging in dairy by weight is used for plastic. We have, of course, the other most popular uses are glass. Glass is sustainable if it's made sustainably. Metal is sustainable, again, if it is derived from sustainable tin mills. And the dairy industry also uses a lot of composites, which means materials that have layers. Now, composites are not all bad, but some of the composites that are bad are actually worse than plastic because those are probably impossible to recycle. So this gives you a quick overview on packaging by weight. And if 44% is used to package dairy products, there's a huge area for growth and a huge area for development, in our opinion. Um, when we try to understand how we can support the dairy industry, we looked a little bit at historic raw milk prices in Europe to understand what are the challenges you all may be facing. And honestly, it is scary to see how much of fluctuations you all have to deal with and how much of competitive pressure you all have to undergo. That being said, the dairy industry has always innovated and has improved efficiency on many levels. When I learned that today the dairy industry produces 1 gallon of milk compared to 10 years back with 30% less water, 19% less carbon, 21% less land, and 20% less manure, it gives me hope and a lot of belief that we can innovate together and move towards more sustainable packaging. Now, I'd like to discuss a little bit about some of the confusions that exist within the whole sustainable, eco-friendly landscape because it's still fairly new concepts. But the first thing I'd like to share with everyone is there is no golden bullet that can give you a package that is faster, cheaper, or more sustainable because we don't have technologies at that maturity right now. So there's a lot of confusion where some packaging manufacturers would use the word biodegradable loosely, eco-friendly loosely, or sustainably made loosely. And a lot of that is confusing. And today, that's something we want to clarify with all of you attending today. This is a timeline on where we believe and how we believe packaging is going to evolve over the next few years. Let's say over the next 5 years, we believe first, there will be a ban on oxo-degradable packaging, and we will show you examples of each. Then, once oxo-degradable packaging gets phased out in return for more compostable and non-residual packaging, slowly brand owners are going to take away these sleeves that are put on bottles, containers for yogurt or ice creams, because putting a label complicates the sustainability process big time. We've already seen people do away with the soda ring tabs, which are made out of plastic, and we believe that's going to keep happening more and more in the future. A few years down the line, we believe a lot of the packaging coloring is going to change. Darker colors will be used less. A conscious effort to reduce inks will be used less. A conscious effort to reduce the amount of inks will be there. And there may be a switch towards more sustainable vegetable inks versus metallic inks that are currently being used. As we move on in the future, let's say in the next 4 or 5 years, we believe packaging is going to eliminate unnecessary closures and make more efficient boxes. Finally, let's say in the span of 7 to 10 years, we believe multi-layer materials that are formed by laminates will be replaced for more sustainable natural-based products. Now, this is from the brand point of view, and I'm going to give you a few examples on what's been happening globally. So when we start with oxo-degradable packaging, which basically means packaging that can break into small bits and pieces if left under the sun, think of plastic bags. A lot of supermarkets in the Middle East had actually introduced plastic bags that were called 100% degradable. Now, while that may be true, the truth is these bags are not sustainable and they're actually worse in some ways than normal plastic bags, because once these break down, they have the potential to contaminate the soil that they break down in, because these are so processed that it defeats the whole purpose. And this ties back into what I was saying. There's so much confusion between, biodegradable, eco-friendly, sustainable. So this is an example of a product that is not going to serve sustainability goals, but was more as a marketing ploy than anything else. So we believe these sorts of products are going to go first. So there's a lot of examples. We have plastic bags, we have cutlery, but this will move over the next year or so. After that, like we said, companies are going to start removing sleeves from their decoration. And we are already seeing that, in few examples around the world where people have replaced plastic with cardboard to create holders. Also, there's been a growth in reusable packaging. Uh, a lot of metal is used for that. A few examples from around the world where Haagen-Dazs, Clorox, and Tide have launched reusable containers. Another example where we can touch upon how the sleeves are going to change. A very recent development just from last month is where Friesland Campina announced that they're going to use 100% recycled PET material instead of maybe whatever they were using right now to sleeve their packaging, PVC or PET, and it's easy to remove. So a consumer can just pull it out and recycling becomes so much easier. As we move a little forward in time, we go back to the point where dark colors and coloring agents will be phased out. And we found a few good examples here. Over here, BASF Chemicals developed water-based inks to print on packaging. Now these inks don't look as vibrant as metallic-based inks perhaps, but they're far more sustainable. Of course, right now these may be more expensive, but as demand increases and we drive demand for these sort of sustainable inks, it will become mainstream. Similarly, if we look at quick serve restaurants like McDonald's and Starbucks, you can see how they have tried in some markets to reduce the amount of ink they consume by 35% in a drive to be more sustainable. Starbucks removed the black pigment from their logo. Evian has gone one step further and has developed a labelless bottle, saying we don't need a label. Why have that extra element in pollution? And there is also a trend where primary and secondary packaging needs to be redesigned to fit, first of all, e-commerce supply chains, and also just to be more efficient. As we then move a little more forward, where we talk about the elimination of unnecessary closures and caps, We've already seen an example in our local market where Nova has reduced a small water bottle that has no cap and is just covered with a foil. This is a concept that's under development where some brands are trying to see how they can, uh, the tear off part of a packet itself can become the spoon. And finally, when we talk about combination materials, laminates, pouches, specialty sachets, this is going to move towards more natural materials. This, however, will take some time because there's so much of testing that has to take place. The technology has to be developed and reach some sort of maturity. But here are some concepts where brands are experimenting to make packaging using coconut fiber. This bottle is packed not in styrofoam, but in a carton made out of mushroom fibers. Here we have, this is, I think, a probiotic drink, and it's made out of recyclable fibers. This is a container for processed cheese and is being tested by a global brand right now, and it's also microwavable. So it's not a matter of if, but when more sustainable options come. And we'd like brand owners to look into these directions and perhaps find ways where we can help collaborate with you. Now, if we look at the other side of the equation, so now we've talked about innovations on the brand side. I want to explain to you guys a little bit about how this works on the manufacturing side. Like I said, there's no golden bullet, unfortunately, and you know, plastics cannot be taken away with. But what we can do is illustrate how we can improve upon it. So this line here, the green to red, let's say this represents price. So the greener it is, the more cost effective it is. So the first step we start in plastic packaging is something called right weighting. To give you an example, and if you would see my camera, this is an example of a normal margarine container or a tub. This is made out of a material, this is made in a process called IML, which is called in-mold labeling. There is already a technology called thermoformed IML or TIML, where you can make a similar container using maybe 12% less material, saving 3 to 8% of energy, and this is what it looks like. Essentially, it's the same concept, but the walls are engineered to be thinner. However, it is still as robust, and it'll still protect the product as well. So this is the easiest way to move one step closer towards sustainability, to lightweight existing packages. The next step is using recycled plastics. Now, recycled plastics are surprisingly more expensive than virgin plastic, which is why they've not really become very mainstream in the Middle East. But we can already start incorporating this in packaging materials here. This is an example of a container we've developed with the idea to fill either cheese or any hot filled sauces. If you see the black layer inside, this is all recycled plastic. So what we can do is have just two layers. The virgin layer will have food contact, but the external layer uses reground recycled plastic. Then we come to something called starch-based plastic. These are plastics that are often called PLA, which is polylactic acid, and these are made using starches of vegetables like corn, sugarcane, cassava. PLA, on average, will be about 2.5 times the price of normal plastic, but it is presently a good alternate that is available. Uh, PLA exists and it's a technology we can already do. PLA glasses look pretty much like plastic, and it's ready to hit the market. Finally, we go into more exotic solutions that are made out of algae, seaweeds, or milk proteins. We are not there yet in terms of the technology, but we have our eyes on universities and research agencies that are developing these technologies. And it is interesting, but I think it will still take time to reach commercial viability. So where I would say the focus would start in improving sustainability is first lightweighting, using recycled plastics or better materials, and maybe looking into starch-based plastics, which are biodegradable in the true sense. As we move on, here are a few interesting examples from around our region. Alan in the UAE just launched their plant-based water bottle. So this is made out of PLA. We've got examples from Sargento where they have reduced the packet weight of their cheddar cheese. Then Viola, a Finnish dairy manufacturer, has introduced a margarine tub that is made from 90% recycled plastic. Um, we also have Tesco, which has partnered with SABIC in developing better shrink wrap packaging with the goal of being circular. And this is a great step forward. And for us, it's great because SABIC is based here. They have know-how on better materials. So now this is a collaboration that's recently started out with Tesco. One of a lovely development, in my opinion, is with Aranca, uh, who have launched a bottle that's made completely out of sugarcane fibers. And yeah, as we move on to sustainability, we move towards convenience. So we have great examples where there's innovations in squeezable yogurt, shredded cheese, and cooking cream. Alain has launched a glass milk bottle in UAE recently, and the great thing is you can charge a premium, at least in the beginning. And with that, we conclude the sustainability part. Now, when we talk about technology, there's an interesting development we'd like to share with you where we think augmented reality can be connected with any package, and it could be woven into your carrier app, so you can find new ways to connect with your audiences and create engagement. So here's a video where we've done a small example, and I'd like to share it with you. So this is straight off the phone. I'm sorry, I guess because of the internet, the video wasn't very smooth, but we have this technology to create augmented reality experiences using packages, and this was a nice example to show you all. That being said, we come to the end of our webinar. To summarize the packaging part, I think there is a real concern about plastic waste generation from consumers, and that's only going to increase. Plastic still remains an important preferred material for dairy packaging because of how cost effective it is. But going forward, that will change a bit. There are many emerging plastic alternatives, and you reach out to us if you would like to learn more. Uh, we have an idea on how to implement augmented reality within existing packaging, and convenience will be a market growing. So I think packaging needs to adapt to really solve those new problems. So in summary, I think what SAPIN can do to help is our vision is to enhance customer brands through world-class packaging. So we would love to sit down with your innovation teams, with your marketing teams, to understand how you'd like to innovate, the directions you'd like to go, and the targets and problems you'd like to solve. And we would love the opportunity to help develop packaging from the ground up that really adds value meaningfully to your brand and to your product and to your customers. I'd like you very much. Thank you for joining us today. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. You can email me or connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Saurabh, and my co-presenter was Mukesh. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we conclude our webinar. We are open to questions, but if you need to leave, we completely understand. But thank you very, very much.
Saurabh, there is a question from Mr. Conan Shahidi. What is the plan of SAPIN to look into circular economy through packaging perspectives?
I think that's a great question. And, one thing that I'm going to say very honestly is if we are to bring in these changes, we have to work very closely with brand owners, because a circular economy, there is not just one stakeholder in it. We have to work closely with the brand owners, with the material manufacturers, with the recyclers. When we gave you the example of Sabic and Tesco, there is a whole infrastructure behind it. So whatever plastic gets used to pack that cheese in Tesco, the waste plastic is collected again, and it is then burnt again and recycled into new plastic. So it's a massive effort. So individually, we cannot create a circular economy just as a packaging manufacturer, but together, packaging manufacturer, brand owner, and material makers together, then we can create a circular economy. We're already in touch for some sort of government support to know how we can help drive recycling campaigns. But what we are doing, I think this is our first step, is to put ourselves out there, say that we are looking to innovate, we're looking to bring in sustainability in packaging over here. If you guys are interested walking this path with us, let's talk, and we'd really like to work on this together. Thank you for the question very much. Do we have any questions either for Mukesh or myself? We have a comment. Recently, Sweden eco-lean using lightweight packaging for milk. What do you say about it? I think Noor, it's an interesting point. There's a lot of companies that are lightweighting or right-weighting. So I don't know particularly about eco-lean. However, I agree with the concept, and I think that's the first step we all should be taking, is how we can right-weight our containers. If there are no more questions, I guess we can end it at this. Mr. Kunen, thank you very, very much for joining us. Mr. Kunen is one of our industry contacts from Almarai. Always a pleasure having you and learning from you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this webinar brought in some pieces of valuable information. And like I said, feel free to reach out to us, and hope to meet you all sometime soon. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a nice day.